Hey guys, welcome to Electronic Dance Money, your number one business resource for making money as electronic musicians and producers. All right. We're back with another episode of Electronic Dance Money, and I'm so damn excited for this episode. Today, I've got my guest, Chris Graham from Chris Graham Mastering, owner and CEO of Bounce Butler and co-host of the Six Figure Home Studio podcast. Chris, how the hell are you doing?
I am so much better now. I'm so pumped to hang with you today, man.
Dude, this is going to be so much fun. You know, this is what's so funny, too. Is that, so for those of you who don't know, all of the listeners listening, this podcast would not be without Chris. He's the one that came up with the name and helped me come up with the idea. I remember we were on a coaching call and you came up with it and my mind was just blown and I immediately started working on it.
I was sitting in that red chair in the next room over. I remember.
That's right.
Very clearly.
It was such an eye-opening moment, and even better yet, it was almost 2 years to the day that happened, and this is episode 50. I was wanting to do something special for episode 50, and here we are. Yeah.
It's so weird to think about anything that's 2 years ago because of what's happened the last year,
right? With
COVID and stuff. It's 2 years ago seems like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Last year was so slow.
Yeah.
Like it was just, it just never ended. It was a never-ending chaos. But here we are. We're slowly coming back out of it. Things are relatively getting back to normal.
This is true.
And I'm so hopeful. I'm even more, dude. What's funny enough is before we scheduled this podcast, I actually scheduled my podcast with Brian, the other host of the Six Figure Home Studio podcast, for the next episode. So I get back-to-back Six Figure Home Studio hosts. It's going to be so much fun.
Amazing.
But today, we've got you. All the focus is on you. I'm so excited for people to hang out and listen to you as well. I know I have a few listeners from the Six Figure Home Studio podcast, so I'm sure they'll be amped that you're on here today as well.
What's up? What's up, guys?
But let's get into your history, man. How did you get involved with music and get to where you're at today with arguably a couple of the most successful businesses, at least one of the most successful podcasts in the industry? How'd you get from just making music to where you are now as a very successful business owner?
Dude, okay, so I'm in a weird spot right now because over the course of the last year with COVID-19, I had to do a lot of soul searching. I had to do a lot of confronting parts of me that I didn't want to confront, things about me that I didn't like, things that I was scared to explore, things from my past. And what came out of that, and for any of you guys that listen to the podcast, the Six Figure Home Studio, heard a little bit about this, but I ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD. And as I dug into that, a lot, I'm not going to give any specifics, but like some really nasty, dark stuff from my childhood came out. And it was really, really, really unpleasant to learn that these sort of things that I'd been hanging on to and had repressed. But at the same time, it was amazing because I was able to start to see them because I was healing. And so if you would have asked me 2 years ago what my origin story was, I would have had a much different answer than I would today. And so my history with music starts, I think, the way a lot of people start, in that had a lot of feels as a kid, had a lot of emotions, and if I was playing piano or my guitar, they made sense for a little while. Like I didn't have the words to describe the way I was feeling and the stuff I was going through, but music kind of gave me an outlet for that. Now, I didn't have any idea that's what was going on. I just knew, like, hey, this is fun. And apparently girls like it when the guy plays guitar too, so win. So yeah, my origin story was I got into music because it was medicine. It helped me deal with the demons I was fighting, and gave me some reprieve. And as I leaned into that, I inadvertently put my 10,000 hours in, not out of discipline, but out of necessity. And so I just wrote and played and sang and learned and learned and learned and learned and learned, and eventually became this like solo singer-songwriter, one-man band, like traveling act. And it was great. This is like college, right around in here. And, I'd recorded a CD and then a second CD, and I was selling these things back in the mid-2000s, right at the end of CDs, right at the end when people would be like, I like your one song. Here's $15 for your whole CD. And me being like, this is amazing. And so I did that, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I thought like the solo singer-songwriter was just sort of my vibe. Now I look back and I'm like, oh, I was a loner because I had unprocessed trauma. That's why I didn't want to be in a band. And so that was it. I would go out and play by myself, and it went well as far as like my own dreams. It's not like I had a hit on the radio or anything, but like I could pay all my bills with music and was on the road making new friends and meeting people and feeling like I was making an impact on other people's lives with my music. And it was awesome. So it made sense to be like, hey, I feel better when I make music. Maybe I should do it as a living, like once I graduate. So I got into recording, mostly just so I could record myself for free. That was like my major at Ohio University. And I got into that, and I sort of had this thought about like, yeah, I'll be in the studio like all day, every day, like for college, and it'll be great. And that is not what it looked like at all. I was in the studio like 20 times maybe, like not very often, not nearly enough. And, but I loved it. And so I would start to take CD sales, and, it was cool. Like I was making like $20,000 a year as a college student selling CDs, and it was awesome. It was unbelievable. I went from like the poorest friend I had, like the poorest of all my friends, to like the most disposable income of my friends. And I was like, this is awesome. And so I started using that money to buy recording gear. And, eventually like at shows, people would be like, wow, you have a CD? That's so cool. I want a CD. How did you get a CD? And I'd be like, let me produce you. I will help you make said CD. And it was great. But I didn't realize this at the time, but I was so symptomatic with PTSD. And again, like I had had it for years. So I didn't know the difference between like the changes I had gone through in puberty and PTSD. Like I thought like, oh, this is just who I am. And like, it's weird. PTSD really distorts how you see other people. It makes everybody else look really dishonest. And like they're going to betray you, and let's not get into that. But so it made working with others challenging. So I really became a lone wolf. And so I was like hey, I'll produce / help you write / mix / master. Like I'll do everything. I'll play all the instruments on your record, most of them anyways. And like I didn't realize it, but it was just like, it wasn't healthy. It was something I was doing because I had this fantasy, which was I want to feel the way I feel once I've had a moment with a guitar, and I feel creatively expressed, and for a moment everything is okay, and I want to feel that way all the time, and that doesn't really work that way.
No, you wanted to put your feeling into other people's tracks when it's really the opposite.
Right.
It's them in the track.
Right. And so they would like mess with my ability to get my fix on the drug of music. So I'd be like, no, the bridge should be like this. And they'd be like, no, it should be like that. And I'd be like, I'm trying to medicate. But again, I didn't have this vocabulary at the time. And so it was weird. Like eventually, I got into a lot of like arguments and tense conversations with people while we were recording. And I was sort of like, it was weird. I was like a heavy metal producer, but I produced like indie folk. So I'd be like, somebody would do a vocal take and I'd be like, what are you doing, dude? You can do better than that. Get your ass back in there. Go. All right. 3, 2, 1, sing. Ugh. Like, I was not a nice person in the studio, and it was weird. Like I was usually really, really, really nice, really sweet to all my friends and kind and encouraging, but like it just got weird when I was trying to medicate with music, and I'd get really like an addict. Like I'd act like an addict.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it does now.
Yeah. Now it does.
Like a few decades later, but it was so. Anyways, initially, like the dream was like I would produce, and then I would outsource some studio musicians, and I'd fill in the gaps with playing parts on the record, and then we'd hire somebody else to master. And eventually, as all singing, all dancing, multiple hat wearing producers find out, the artist will run out of money at the end, and then they can't hire a mastering engineer, and so you're stuck mastering it yourself. And so I had to learn. So that forced me sort of into the fire. And as I learned, I realized I was like, I really like mastering so long as I didn't mix the song or had anything else to do with the song, because it's just too much emotional pressure for me to try to do it by myself, to do everything. And so eventually I started reaching out to friends that were producers and saying, hey, do you have any records that you've already put out that I could remaster? And it was great because I could hear what the other mastering engineer had done, and then I would put my own spin on it, and I'd put some a little bit different polish on it, so that like initially when you heard it, you'd be like, oh wow, that sounds a little bit better, which was just the loudness wars. Like I would just make it slightly louder and slightly brighter. And but anyways, like a mentor of mine, this guy Chris Pyle, this was all kind of happening in Athens, Ohio, is where I went to college and then stuck around after I graduated. And Chris was a mentor to me and owned a studio, and I'd mastered a record for him. He's like, man, you're really good at this. You could do this for a living. And I was like, yeah, right. So what if I'm good at it? How do I tell people I'm good at it? And so he kept insisting, no, you've got this. You could do this for a living. And a couple years later, I had an idea for a website, and it's chrisgrahammastering.com. It's basically still the same as it was when I made it the first go around with some improvements. But you would select a genre on this like dial on the website, and then the song would start to play, and then there's a before and an after button, and you'd push back and forth, and you could hear in real time mastered, not mastered, mastered, not mastered. And as far as I know, I'm the first person that had ever done this. And
what year was that? Was that like 2007,
2008, somewhere in there? I'd have to look a little closer, but I'm going to say that's probably about right.
You had to have been the first person to do that.
I think I was. And so I didn't do it by myself. Like there was a whole team of people involved, but I hired them and figured out how to project manage and figured out how to like take the development they did and then combine it with other developers. And like I was just trying to be a mastering engineer, man, and I thought that's what I needed to do. And so I launched this website, and then I started running Google ads, write a book. What was it called? You know the answer probably better than I do. Perry Marshall's
Ultimate Guide to Google Ads.
Yeah, I read that book and started running ads. And like within a couple days, a complete stranger mailed me a check to master his record. Name was Greg. He's from Pennsylvania. He sent me $350. And I was like, sweet googly moogly. There are probably more Gregs out there. This is awesome. And like I got the bug. Like it was like I had run a bunch of small businesses before, but they were all like, guitar lessons, or I'm going to play my guitar for a bunch of people, and
nothing real serious.
No, yeah, they weren't like businesses. And so as I leaned into that, I would grow it as much as it could handle it, and then as much as I could handle it, and then I would read a book and learn something new about business, and then I would make changes in my business, and then it would run way better. And then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I should read more business books. And this is so weird. I started to medicate with books instead of with music. And it was this sort of magical transition and chapter in my life, books. But I would just...
There's dad joke number one.
And so I would just read these books, and even if I only got like one sentence out of the book that I could apply to my business, it was worth it. It was like $14 and a couple hours invested to like learn something that will change my life. And the business, like I never thought I'd break $40,000 a year. I thought like at 45 years old, I'll probably make $40,000 a year, and that's just what I'm
capping out.
And like, dude, I broke 40,000 my second year in business, and it was this like, holy crap! Why didn't anyone tell me there was useful things in books? And it's funny because it's like, isn't that all school was? Like, isn't that the only thing?
Right books? Not the right books.
Not the right, exactly, not the right books at all. And so I just sort of went nuts, and I read like thousands and thousands of pages of self-help and business books, and then eventually read a book, it's the autobiography from Mark Cuban. Everybody knows who Mark Cuban is. And in that book, it was funny. Mark Cuban was like, never take investor money. And I was like, aren't you on a show about giving investor money? That's weird. And he was like, number 2, read biographies. And I was like, got it. Thanks, Mark. And I just started to crush on reading biographies. And like, it was amazing medicine for the at this point, undiagnosed PTSD that I had. And so like, I'd, destroy a 1,000-page biography on Harry Truman. Is that one 1,000? Yeah, that's got to be 1,000. I was so much healthier if I had been consistently reading, but because I ran a small business and had a family and, a bunch of other stuff, like there'd be periods where I'm reading like crazy and I'm pretty healthy, and then I would stop reading and would get unhealthy and then would start reading again. And like, it was just, I was cycling through these like chapters of unhealth and chapters of health. And, it's weird because when you've got PTSD, there are long-term damages that happen in your brain. Like, so this is personal, but like, you have a hippocampus in your brain, and it has a lot to do with navigation and converting short-term memories into long-term memories. And if you've had a ton of PTSD issues, flashbacks, your brain ends up poisoning itself and your hippocampus shrinks by 8%. And so that creates all these weird memory gaps when you're having conversations with people, especially if they're emotional conversations. And like the other thing, I eventually, at some point I had stopped touring and I had just dedicated myself to stuff in the studio. I'm getting my timelines all jacked up here. But
you're good.
One of the things I'm realizing now, only in the past couple of weeks, is I'm like, well, I wanted to stop touring because I would get lost all the time. Like, I'd be driving somewhere and I'd miss like 5 exits in a row, and I'd end up hundreds of miles away from where I wanted to be. And like, this is so embarrassing, but it's an issue with, if you've got a really intense type of PTSD, what I have is called complex PTSD. So it's complex. And I would get lost, and it was very stressful, and I didn't like it. And like, even if I had GPS running, unless I was like in a really healthy spot, I would miss an exit and not realize it for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it was really sad and stupid. And I just thought it was like, oh, I'm just flaky and quirky and a creative. And
yeah, right. Yeah.
No, so much more than that. So getting closer to present day, a couple of years ago, mastering business was kicking butt. Had a couple kids and started making friends with other people in my industry. First and foremost was this guy, Lid Shaw, that runs the Recording Studio Rockstars podcast. He saw like a video ad that I had done for Chris Graham Mastering and reached out and was like, hey, you want to be on my show? And I was like, cool, yeah. And so I went on his show and ended up getting into his mastermind group, which was a bunch of other like content creators and entrepreneurs in the audio space, and ended up meeting this guy, Brian, a year or two in. And Brian and I met up in Nashville for Summer NAMM, became like instantaneous bros, started a podcast just to hang out with him. And Six Figure Home Studio, it's a business podcast, at least it used to be, a business podcast for people in the recording studio industry. We're in the process of relaunching season 2, which is going to be a business podcast for creative freelancers. And we did that, and there was like never any intent on my side for it to ever be more than like maybe 500 people would listen someday. And it went so far beyond that. And I still haven't wrapped my mind around it.
It's huge.
Well, thank you.
I mean, it is unreal. I mean, that podcast, I went through Brian's courses. I'm fairly good friends with Brian now. I'm good friends with you. I do like it's the reach of that podcast, and it just goes to show podcasts in general, the reach that they have and the ability to help people. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's got to be at least once or twice a week that I see in the Six Figure Home Studio Facebook group someone tagging you guys being like, this podcast has changed my life.
Yeah. And that brings us up to date a little bit with my story. I was getting that a lot. I still get that a lot, and that freaked me out.
I bet.
Like, that really freaked me out.
A lot of pressure.
Well, it was a lot of pressure, but it was like the podcast is edited, and so I sound real smart. I really sound like I got my shit together on air. And when it comes to like business stuff, if I'm healthy, yeah, I do. But there were all kinds of other parts of my life where PTSD, like I couldn't go to concerts. Like my main trigger was if someone was behind me and to my left and made a noise. And you can't go to, like, a concert's difficult to go to.
Yeah.
Because there are people behind you. Large groups of people are difficult. The mall is difficult. So there were all these areas where, like, I didn't understand what was going on. But as all these people started, telling me you changed my life, and I'm like looking at aspects of my personal life, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this, I'm not this like universally awesome person. Like I don't have my shit together in every way. And it was frustrating because the more successful I got, like I was successful before the podcast, but the podcast, like it was clear that like that was opening a door to a new chapter.
It put you in the limelight.
It put me in the limelight, and it was this weird thing because I knew I was like, okay, well, I never really need to worry about money again, but I still don't feel safe, and this is the PTSD. So it's sort of like fame and shame. PTSD, complex PTSD, is a lot. There's a lot of shame rooted in awful stuff that happened to you, and was it your fault, and like so shame and fame don't really go together very well. And so I hadn't processed all my shame yet. And so when COVID hit, the time came, not by my choice. I had started to lean into it, but it just sort of went nuts, and I had to get into therapy, and I was even in the hospital at one point, trying to get this all figured out. And it's been the hardest year of my life for sure. But also probably the best, because all of a sudden, like since I've gotten into therapy, all these symptoms have started to go away. We were talking about this just before we started recording, and all of a sudden, like now that I've like experienced health, and like I still have symptoms from time to time. I have good days and bad days, but now that I've had like more than one good day in a row, sometimes it'll be like 2 weeks in a row. Now I'm starting to be like, oh, that's a symptom. Oh, gosh. Okay. Yeah, I could see. And so one of the things we were just talking about, we're getting real personal here, but is night terrors. So I didn't know what night terrors were until recently because I thought they were normal.
Everyone just had them.
Yeah.
Just how you wake up.
Yeah, you wake up, you can't remember anything from your dream, but you feel like someone just electrocuted you. Like, so you shook yourself awake, and now you're freaking terrified, but you have no idea what you're terrified of. And then you have to try to go back to sleep after that. And so that was going on a lot, like a couple times a night. Sometimes it'd be like close to a dozen times a night. And so I'm in an amazing mood because this is so weird. I had a night terror this morning, but I hadn't had one in over a week, and I can't remember ever going a week without them. So I feel like I'm like born again as I'm like learning. Okay, that's PTSD. That's normal. What you have been experiencing for the past few decades, not. So I feel alive. So origin story.
It is an epic one, dude. It is interesting. I don't want to say funny, but I mean funny it is interesting because I remember listening to the first couple of episodes of the Six Figure Home Studio podcast, and the first two episodes are you interviewing Brian and Brian interviewing you, and you're 100% right. Your story is significantly changed, and that's 100% because of your experiences over the past year or so. And it's much more it's a much more personal story, but it's like you can see the growth so much more clearly. Like the growth makes a lot more sense. Um Determining, what your struggles were and why you struggled with them and why you ended up going down a certain route that you went down. It's being able to self-analyze like that and be like, "Oh my god, that makes so much." Like you learn, it's like you're relearning about yourself or learning about another thing about yourself. And I mean, you couldn't have gotten there without going through the hassle of the past year, which is, I'm great. I'm so happy for you because yeah, it's awesome, dude.
Thanks,
You're
man.
killing it.
Well, it's been wild, as it's taken a lot to kind of get used to that. I had some ideas about who I was as a person, and I looked at like reading all these business books and was like, well, I guess I just have more willpower than everybody else. And I don't know. I think you look at anybody that's done a lot in any area, they've gotten really good at one particular thing. And I think there's the temptation to look at them and just say, oh, they must just be better than everybody else, or they must have a gift. And in some cases that's true, but I think a lot of times they put their 10,000 hours in, not necessarily because of willpower, but it was like a silver lining of how they were processing something that was going on in their life. And for me, that was absolutely it. Like I had some strange, like obsessive traits as a result of my trauma. And so it's weird now that I'm healthy, like I look back at the past year and I'm so grateful, like, to kind of go off what you were saying, I'm so grateful that I had these experiences over the past year. But at the same time, a lot of the things I learned before I got diagnosed, like the business stuff and the, how to write an AI, how to teach yourself how to write an AI app that can bounce all your sessions for you and then make it into a business and then have it pay all your bills. Like, this is a weird thing to be able to do. But I don't know that I would have been able to do it if my past hadn't been so dark.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
Super weird, man.
It is very weird how, and you get into those conversations with yourself too, where you're like, would I change anything? Would I want,
yes.
Yeah. Obviously there are certain things you would love to change, but, for some people, I definitely know people who have a dark past though too, who would be like, I wouldn't change anything, which is crazy characteristic. And I feel like a lot of those people are just because they wouldn't be who they were today. For other people, it's not the case, but I do know a lot of people who have suffered some really dark shit, but they still would be like, I don't think I would change it. I don't think I would want to. Which is it's a really interesting and weird trait.
Yeah, well, and that gets complicated.
It's very complicated.
It gets complicated when there's mental health issues in play, because like that dark past has a lot to do with who you are, on a really deep level. But there also are inevitably relationship casualties along the way as a result of those symptoms. And so there's this guy, Ricky, who was like a son to me. He was like, without a doubt, was my best friend for a couple years. And with PTSD, especially when there's been a big betrayal in your past that contributed to PTSD, you fear betrayal again. And so what'll happen with people that have similar issues, similar mental health issues to me, is you'll get in your head that this close friend of yours is going to betray you, and then so you end the relationship and you accuse them of all kinds of stuff, and you believe all of it. Like, you're completely convinced. And like, I'm so embarrassed about this, but like, I just hung out with Ricky for the first time last week, and was able to apologize to him and be able to see like, oh my gosh, like I had thought you had said these things, like they had gotten distorted in my mind. Memory distortion is an issue with when your hippocampus shrinks by 8%. You can have gaps in your memory, and as you try to repair those gaps and like put together what was actually said, it can get a little funky, especially when you're in the middle of a flashback and you are remembering how you felt in the midst of trauma. Anyways, Ricky and I hung out, and it was this like amazing healing moment to be able to recognize, like, dude, I wronged you. I said things about you that weren't true, but at the time I thought they were true. And that was indicative of like my mental health issues at the time. And I got all emotional, and we cried and we hugged, and then I drove home and got lost. And and even in spite of the fact that GPS was on, I still managed to not find my way back home, which is so bizarre to me, because I look at that and I'm like, so I have a hard time with GPS, but I could definitely sit down in front of a computer and write thousands of lines of code and build like an artificial intelligence. Like, cool. What the hell is wrong with me? So, yeah.
What would you say has been the biggest thing for you with like figuring out what's helped you out the most with mental health? Obviously, I would say probably therapy is like one of the
Hands
best
down.
things.
Yeah,
one of the best things. And I would argue anyone in general should just go to therapy to check up on yourself. It's a really a lot of the times it takes a few sessions to really open up and get comfortable and trust someone and really dig in. But I went to therapy for years, and it was the first time that I really decided to go and like explore myself, and that helped me out. I learned so much about myself. And my girlfriend Marty, she's never gone to therapy. She was always interested, and I pushed her into it because I was like, you should just try it out, see how it is. And she's gone for a little while, and it's helped her out a bunch as well.
It's the ultimate performance enhancer.
Yeah. Getting someone, and one of the most important things is getting someone who's kind of unbiased, who can talk to you straight and be like, okay, well, I think you're saying this because of that, or I think we need to dig a little bit more into this. And also, I would argue a good trait of a great therapist or counselor is someone who tells you like there is an end date. They don't want to keep dragging you on to get money. They actually want to help you. What outside of therapy, and we can even dive a little bit more into therapy if that's what you're interested in talking about, but what has been other facets of your life that you've been able to change or apply that has been able to really strengthen your mental health and become a stronger person?
Well, in regards to therapy is a little bit like fire. Fire in the right context is pretty much the greatest thing ever. Like, all of civilization is essentially founded on, we figured out how to use fire. Your car, it runs on fire, dude. Like, you're burning something. However, fire in the wrong context is pretty much the worst thing ever. And therapy is a lot like fire. Good therapy is the best thing ever. Bad therapy is the worst thing ever. And I have had both. I've had really, really, really bad therapy, and I've had really, really, really good therapy. And so I think a lot of the secret here, and I'm looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what we're supposed to be talking about, but I've derailed us.
Actually, this is great. Let's keep going on with this.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Let me talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs just for a second, because this dovetails perfectly. So there's this guy Maslow. He's I believe a psychologist back in the day, and he came up with this pyramid. And this pyramid is basically like, look, the base of the pyramid, what everyone needs is they need their psychological needs met: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. No, physiological needs. What am I talking about? They need their physiological needs met, and if they get those needs met, then they can move on to the next level of the pyramid, which is their safety needs: personal security, employment, resources, health, property, etc. Then if they get that, then they can handle the next level, which is love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. If they get that, Then they can start to go after esteem. That's respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom. And then if they get that, they get to the top of the pyramid, the juicy part, the self-actualization, the desire to become the most that one can be. And boy, that's just the coolest thing, because there's no way that anyone would ever listen to this episode and be like, become the most I can be. Boring. And so your physiological needs are tricky because I was saying psychological, and I think that might have been a Freudian slip, but see what I did there? And because your physiological and your psychological are really tied together. So for me, we were talking about night terrors. Sleep is one of your base needs, but sleep was a terrifying place. I didn't even talk about the nightmares that I would have with PTSD. I'd have nightmares as well pretty much every single night before. I was always like being chased by a group of people trying to protect a group of people that I loved through a building of really weird buildings with lots of stairs, and it's like a maze. Essentially, I'm like in a maze with people I love every night trying to defend them, and it messed my sleep up. So I would wake up exhausted and sometimes terrified, and and I wouldn't eat right. I wouldn't drink enough water. I wouldn't breathe. One of the things I found when I started to get better with PTSD is that I hold my breath all the time. So, every time I would turn the corner in my car, I'd hold my breath. I don't know why.
Wow.
So weird. But I didn't notice any of these things because I had lived with them for decades. And so your physiological needs, in order to get your physiological needs, you got to have your brain in the right spot. You have to be working in your own best interest. And unless your mind is healthy, you cannot work in your own best self-interest.
No, not at all. And that's, it's actually a really good point, because people will think, oh, well, I have food, I have water, I have warmth, I can sleep. And it's like, okay, yeah, but are you eating healthy? Because that can play just as much into as, just having food in general. Well, how are you eating? How's your sleep? I mean, if you're getting 4 hours of sleep a night, that's a dangerous game to play. That can significantly affect your psychological needs as well, and how you perform tasks, how you process information, how you react to things. There's a lot of stuff that plays in. Sleep is crazy. I mean, that's such a major player in how you run. But yeah, you do have to make, that base needs to be covered, but also in the right way, in a healthy way, in a healthy manner. Because if that's not covered, nothing else can really work as properly.
Yeah. So I think where we all want to get is self-actualization. We all want to be the best that we can be. And I think what a lot of people do wrong, especially in music, and dare I say, EDM, in my experience, tends to have more issues here than most genres.
1000%. Yes.
But there seems to be some confusion about the difference between self-actualization and esteem.
Yes. And I was just about to mention this as well. 100%. Most people flip it. Or even sometimes they think of self-actualization as being the bottom. It's and this is a lot of the times where you'll see the starving artist. I don't care. I'll be a starving artist as long as I can tour, or I'm making great music that people are loving. And it's tough to be a great starving artist if you don't get enough sleep, if you don't eat the right food, if you don't have all these things. And esteem alone, that is such a... I've become obsessed with Maslow's hierarchy of needs within the past year, 2 years. Just horribly obsessed. I mean, I've been getting a lot of the time I've been focusing on my safety needs with me and my family. My love and belongingness has always kind of been there. I've always had great relationships with my friends and my family as well. That was really easy to make sure that was established. But where my struggle has always been is the esteem needs. And I would argue it's probably that you could probably say it's 90% of people struggle with those esteem needs, how they feel about themselves and the respect they're trying to garner. And a lot of the times the EDM producers, they want respect. Like that's what they want. And they think that the self-actualization or respect comes with the self-actualization, which is so not the case, because when you are respected is when you can actually start self-actualizing and being someone that you really want to be, the best that you could possibly be.
Yeah, well, you have to like yourself first. And I think that's where this conversation is so valuable and useful to me, because I'm still processing all this. I'm re-looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the first time since I've figured out the PTSD stuff. And I'm looking at it now and I'm like, what we talked about earlier about podcasts blew up and all these people are telling me Brian and I changed their life, and like this esteem thing, the second from the top, was going really, really, really well. But my safety needs and my physiological needs and my love and belonging were all jacked up from PTSD. That it was like my Maslow's hierarchy of needs started to look like an upside down like pyramid balancing on the tip. And so it got really weird and complicated to hang out with somebody on a coaching call and like see their life change, see them grasp, okay, this is the thing that's been holding you back for 3 years. Like, you have not been marketing yourself properly. You haven't branded yourself properly. You need to lean into your strengths. This podcast is a good example of that. We had that moment of like, dude, you should content marketing. You should start a podcast and you should call it Electronic Dance Money, EDM. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
And so it was so fun to see people like grab on to some insight that I would have and run with it. But then I would go home and like my kid would run up behind me on my left and I'd have a flashback and I would on some level feel like there was impending doom, that like our whole family was going to get destroyed, like in this life and the next, unless I stayed constantly hypervigilant. And hypervigilance is it's one of the main symptoms of PTSD. So the main symptoms are irritability, agitation, hostility, self-destructive behavior, and hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is this like, I am fully aware of my surroundings. I hear and see and smell everything because I believe that or in my case, my entire family is in terrible danger. And if I'm not aware, there's going to be a sneak attack. And I have to be ready to respond in an instant. And it was weird because it feels like hypervigilance feels like a superpower, because like you end up doing weird things like John Wick type, like reflexes and stuff like that. And like I would run into that sort of stuff all the time where I'd be like, okay, well, there's some context where I seem to have like a superpower. But why do but I'm still healing in this area, so I'm still trying to understand this. But then you'd look at other people who were not hypervigilant, who didn't have like this absolute 24/7 awareness. Yes, sixth sense. And it made them look stupid.
Yeah.
And so you'd get really frustrated. And then, with the memory issues, that made them look even more stupid because you remembered things differently than they did, but you didn't necessarily remember them correctly. But in other contexts, memory's great. If I'm reading a book, seems to be pretty good over there. So, all right, so let's bring this back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So your physiological needs are tied into your psychological needs, because if you are not acting in your own best self-interest, things don't go well. And that's the funny thing that like we assume about humans. Humans act in their own their own best self-interest. We don't. We very rarely do. And then I think, you get up to this next level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs: safety needs, personal security, employment, resources, health, property. My issue with PTSD, with my mental health, and what the reason that if I could go back in time 15 years and talk to myself, I would smack myself over the head. Actually, I wouldn't do that because then he'd have a flashback and kick my ass because he's hypervigilant. I'm not anymore. He would have destroyed me. But he'd be like, dude, you really need to get into therapy. It's the absolute single most important thing you need to do. If you don't, you are going to hurt so many people emotionally. And you're just not going to be happy and healthy unless you do that. But here's the thing, like if you don't have good mental health, you perceive that there are safety issues where there are not. So like if I'm, going to a concert to see my friend play with his band, to play out the record I mastered for him, and it's like this big celebration, and there's like thousands of people there, but I feel danger the whole time I'm there and I don't know why, that messes with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It messes with my ability to love and belong, that next level up. It messes with how I see esteem, and it messes with my ability to self-actualize. And so therapy is so important because I hope I'm not projecting my own baggage onto anybody else here, but I think we all project. We all take our garbage and we project it onto other people, but we also all have blind spots. And therapy is so helpful because it helps you find your blind spots.
Yeah.
And so back to what you said previously about just getting like a checkup, your body is pretty complicated. And you go, if you're like a real grown-up, I guess I'm not a real grown-up, but then you have a physical once a year, right? Your brain has 1 billion neurons and 1 trillion connections between each of those neurons. Neurons is like a brain cell, right? It's like the actual processor, like upstairs there. 1 trillion connections. Your brain is the most complicated thing in the known universe. We don't understand it on any level because we spent thousands, maybe millions of years as hunter-gatherers. And then 10,000 years ago, we figured out agriculture. And now we've got iPhones. Like, bro, we are not cut out for this at all. Like, the world is changing way too fast for us.
Very rapidly.
And you got to figure out what's going on upstairs with a pro. This is not like go read a book about this and you'll figure it out on your own. You're going to need more than that. And I think like Maslow's hierarchy of needs is it's a great tool to be able to organize your psychology and just sort of like rate each of these on a scale of 1 to 10, I guess.
Dude, yes. Holy shit. This is actually really interesting. It's Maslow's hierarchy, from what we're talking about here, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I actually love that. Grading everything on, you got to truly like be honest with yourself. Because this is not, what we're talking about here is not just something that is like you can kind of throw at the wayside or it's really not that important. It is it is involved with everything in your life and determines how successful and healthy you can truly be. So I love the idea of rating things on a 1 to 10 scale and looking at those and kind of judging, okay, why do I have an issue with safety needs? Why is it that I might have this issue? Or why might I have an issue with love and belongingness or even esteem needs? And that's a great conversation starter with a therapist. If you go into a session with something in mind, being like, hey, I was hearing about this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I feel like I have an issue with this, and I guarantee that therapist or counselor is going to know something about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and probably has a way of digging into that for you.
Yeah. And so, perfect example for me. So, first one, physiological needs. If you'd have talked to me a year and a half ago and said, how are your physiological needs? Air, water, food, shelter, sleep, etc. I'd have been like, on a scale of 1 to 5, I'd be like, I would have said 4 because I'd only known like not being able to sleep well. Now I'd look back and I'd say like 2.
That's another great example. You might go in thinking I have an issue here, but really the therapist goes, no, your issue's over here.
Exactly.
You're overlooking this.
Yeah. If you would have asked me a year and a half ago, how are your safety needs? I would have been like 1 or 2. Like, I feel so unsafe all the time. And then if you would have said love and belonging, I would have looked at that and have it would have been a lot higher. 4.
Yeah.
Esteem, I would have been like 17 out of 5. Like, I'm doing okay there. And then self-actualization, I would have also given myself a 5 out of 5. I would have been like,
Yeah.
I'm learning, I'm growing as a person constantly every day. But I think I also would have been getting confused about the difference between esteem and self-actualization. You could be a 5 out of 5 on self-actualization and have nobody know your name outside of friends and family. And for us in the music community, that is challenging because many of us see self-actualization as fame. If everyone knows who I am, then I have become the most I can be. And which isn't to say that there are not fully self-actualized people who aren't also really famous, but one does not automatically equal the other. And boy, that is hard to wrap my mind around.
And there's some growth with that too. When you're self-actualizing, it doesn't necessarily mean you've hit the top. It means that there's still probably a ways to go. It's just you're doing the best that you could possibly do in that moment.
Yeah.
And, it's like a building block. Over time, that grows. That growth becomes exponential.
Well, and a perfect example of that is the normal transition we go through in school. My junior year of high school, I was like, ran track. That was like my favorite thing. And I was doing really good. I was like winning races and it was fun. It was really, really great. And so from a self-actualization standpoint, like I'd worked really hard to be able to run as fast as I could. And that went well. And so my self-actualization was high. That was what I was doing. But then freshman year of college, I didn't run track. And so I had to kind of start over and I had to look at this again. So there is a cycle. It's not just one Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're going to move on. If you have kids, your safety needs change. Your physiological needs change. Your love and belonging really, really, really changes. You have not cuddled with anyone ever until you have held your own baby and you have felt the warmth of, oh my gosh, I love this little person.
Truly love, unconditionally.
Yeah, I would.
That's a different kind of love.
It's totally different. I would, like, if I had to sacrifice my own body to save this child, I wouldn't hesitate. Same thing with getting married. Like, it really, gosh, like looking back at what I know about myself now and how messed up my Maslow's hierarchy of needs was. That's like 14 other episodes. But there was so much looking back at myself now where I'm like, Chris, why did you feel the necessity to figure all of this stuff out by yourself? Why didn't you shop around for a therapist to find someone you could connect with and go to therapy? If I could go back, and I'm unique. Like, I had a pretty serious mental illness that I didn't know about related to trauma. So I wasn't born with it. It was something like, it was a nurture issue, not a nature issue. I should have been in therapy every week. Like, I wasn't. I didn't, like, I went more than a decade. Like, I was in therapy in like middle school for a little bit. And no, it was like 2 decades. And then I went like 20 years without going to therapy. And the first person I got into therapy with turned out to not actually be a good fit on any level. And it made it way, 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 way worse. But because it got way worse, I also got diagnosed as a result of that. So there's a silver lining even in that.
Yeah. It was interesting when I started going to therapy. The reason why I started going was this was before I even knew what Maslow's hierarchy of needs was. And it was when I was trying to produce a bunch and be a full-time musician, artist. I wanted to tour and I wanted to be it all, do it as an EDM producer. And I was obsessed with perfection. I thought if things were not perfect, if I did not do the best I possibly could, which I never felt like I was doing the best I possibly could because nothing was ever perfect. So I hated myself for it. I hated my work. I thought no one liked me. No one respected me. I was always going to be terrible, but I just had to work. I just had to be in the studio and go at it. And it wasn't until I started to dig into some things in therapy when I really started to recognize how much this thing I wanted became so unhealthy for me that it was destroying everything I ever wanted. It was becoming self-destructive. It was I started to isolate myself from people because I was so gung-ho about this one. I can't do anything but this one thing, and that's my answer to everything else. So I completely ignored everything. I ignored my safety. I had my physiological needs, but I didn't care about that as much. I wasn't working out. I was eating like shit. I wasn't getting the best sleep. I wasn't, and this was right around the time I moved away from Idaho and moved to Texas. And so I was trying to get as far away from my family as possible. And with that, this is the first time my mom I'm her only son. I have a sister, but this is her baby, her youngest kid moved away, and I wanted nothing to do with my family. And my mom would try to call me and I'd get upset that she's calling me because I'm trying to have some space. And so like, I'm cutting out the love and belongingness and all for what I think I need to do, which is self-actualize. Completely ignored all these things for something that was so unhealthy, which I thought was the answer to everything. And as I dug into these things with therapy, it was like, I need to stop this, which was tough because this is something that I thought I loved so much and I needed to do and I wanted to do so bad. And so cutting it off was almost like I was cutting myself, like off my soul. But taking a break and stepping away and going, you don't have to do this. Like I was having insane anxiety attacks. I would go into the studio, try to work on track, and I would do this multiple times every single day. Go in, try to write something, couldn't get anything, come out upset, frustrated, just talking shit about myself. Very, very bad for self-esteem. And it was, you can't write well if you go into sessions like that, or the last session you had ended in that way and you go into the next one thinking, it's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And so it would cause insane anxiety. The first time I ever had anxiety, and because I put so much damn pressure on myself for no damn reason, no one was paying attention to me. This was all self-caused. And that's when I finally took a step back and was like, I need to stop. This needs to stop. And I stopped. I didn't step in the studio for a month, maybe 2 months. And that's when I started to finally figure my shit out. Like everything started to come together. My mind was much more clear. I was much more relaxed. And it was like this weight was lifted off my chest. And then every once in a while I'd get these itches, I'd get these bugs, and I still get them where I go, I want to be like, something's telling me to go write music. And then I'd go in and I would write the best thing that I've ever fucking written in less time than I ever did. And that still happens.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, and on that note, I feel so bad because like we are in the thick of such an awesome conversation, but for my own mental health, I have to leave so I can go meet with my personal trainer here in just a minute.
Good.
I got to get this physical part down. I'm still working on that.
Yep.
But dude, Christian, this was so great, man.
Yeah. Dude, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. There's no one else I wanted to do this episode with because you're just such your story is so great.
You are.
Fist bump.
I love you, brother.
Dude, well, do you have anything you'd like to plug? Obviously, the podcast and your businesses.
Yeah, so 2 plugs. So we're getting ready to relaunch the Six Figure Home Studio as a Six Figure Creative. So kind of keep an eye out for that. It'll be available everywhere podcasts are given away. And number 2, one of the things that's helped me so much in regards to making the podcast, but also in regards to just giving me personal satisfaction, is helping other people. So the way we met, you were a fan of the podcast, and then you hired me to be your business coach. So business coaching is my main thing right now. Mastering is something I do as well. And software development with like Bounce Butler and podcasting and all this other stuff. But business coaching tends to be the main thing. It's the biggest giver of life for me. So if you're a creative looking for a business coach, go to chrisgrahamcoaching.com and you can book your first session for a significant discount.
Hell yes. I strongly recommend it to anyone listening. Again, we wouldn't be here without it. So, Chris, again, thank you so much. I'll have all the links on the show notes at enviousaudio.com/episode 50. So you guys can go grab those over there. But Chris, thank you so much again. I appreciate your time, man.
You too, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
All righty.